I'm David Blevins, and I'm one of the creators of Apache TomEE. I asked the question already, who uses Tomcat? Okay, so we got some good hands. Who uses Eclipse? Okay, about the same number of people. Who also has to use another server like Glassfish or JBoss, or many hands, but not exactly the same. First, the question, what is Apache TomEE? So, pretty simple. We got the name from Tomcat plus Java EE equals TomEE. And it's meant to imply that, first of all, it's Tomcat. So we take Tomcat, we unzip it, we add some additional libraries, we zip it back up, we run it through the Java EE TCK, and it's certified, and we call that TomEE. We take the zip it back up, put it on the website for download. So essentially, we're taking and we're adding libraries to Tomcat just the same way you would add libraries to Tomcat. So there are a lot of servers that use Tomcat internally, but that doesn't mean you can use the Tomcat server XML file or the directory structure or any tools that work with Tomcat. You got to use the tools that apply to that server because it's a different server. Well, this is the same server, so you can use all the Tomcat tools and things like that with TomEE. It's built from basically all Apache components. So to fulfill the web profile, you need to add some extra functionality. We have OpenJPA, OpenWebBeans, OpenEJB, MyFaces, Apache Bean validation, CXF, and ActiveMQ. So we add these into the zip, and then really the most important part of all this, I would say, are the core values down there at the bottom. And that's, we're trying to take Tomcat and complete it so that it can do the things that, people go to the Tomcat mailing list, they say, can I deploy an EJB into Tomcat? They say, no! Can I deploy web service? No! And so we want it so that Tomcat does these things out of the box. But we want to do it in a way that keeps Tomcat very small. It doesn't really work if we bloat it up so big that it's just as large as any of the other servers out there. If you wanted to use a large server like that, you could. There are options out there. Another one is to be certified. So it passes all the web profile TCK tests. There are tens of thousands of those. It takes quite a long time to pass them. So when you develop an app on TomEE, you can port that to another server because it's a certified platform. I mean, obviously we know the secret is portability is never quite as easy as you think it will be, but I guarantee you it's going to be a lot easier if you started with a certified server rather than building up all the stuff yourself and trying to move it around. And then primarily, we want to be Tomcat. So if you've done something that ruins your Tomcat experience in some way, we want to fix that. So if you find any issues that, this works in Tomcat, this doesn't work in TomEE, definitely let us know. We will be on that very quickly and resolve it as fast as possible. All right, so a big question is, what is the web profile? So the web profile is something that we introduced. When I say we, I mean the Java EE expert groups. I've participated in the JCP for a long time. EJB 3.0 was the first specification that I helped at. EJB 3.1, now 3.2, then Java EE 6 and Java EE 7. So the web profile, it aims to fix a very real problem with Java EE. And that is, it was too big. There's too much in it. After more than 10 years of existence, it had built up a certain number of legacy APIs that are not used, no one needs, and they're there for backwards compatibility, so we couldn't exactly just remove them completely. So what we did was we created the web profile. The web profile's goal is to be the minimum set of functionality that you would need or would want to use, and to allow you to, app server vendors and everybody should be able to just start with this minimal set of functionality and go up from there. So the web profile is about that big, and the full profile is about that big. They're about half the size. So a lot of times when you hear people talk about Java EE, and even if they say J2EE still, ask them the question, do you know what the web profile is? If they don't know what the web profile is, stop listening to everything they're saying at that moment. If they do know what the web profile is, then definitely they listen to them. They might have some good ideas. But a lot of the problem with brands is that people get to know a certain brand for a certain thing, and then it changes, and they're not up to date with the changes. The web profile is definitely a really important part of Java E6. Actually, now in Java E7, we're going to take the full profile and shrink that down a little bit more. And I'll show that on the next slide. But what is in the full profile that is not in the web profile? Basically everything on this slide. So CMP entity beans are not in the web profile. Corba is not in the web profile. JAX RPC is not in the web profile. Now these are all very much legacy APIs, and in Java E7 they're likely to get removed from the full profile. So a full profile server will not have to implement CMP entity beans and JAX RPC. Corba is still under discussion. So Corba might still be there in Java E7 for the full profile. Things that are in the full profile that are not in the web profile that are still useful, everything right here. So JAX-RS obviously is really important. That's actually getting removed into the web profile in Java E7. We have a distribution of TomEE with it, with JAX-RS in it. In fact, we have a distribution of TomEE with all these technologies in there. JAX-WS, web services, full-on web services, not RESTful web services, actual web services, still useful. JMS, obviously very critical. One that's not very well known is connectors. That's actually how JMS is plugged into an app server. And I've got a talk later on today about kind of revamping this old API into something that's relevant for today. I think it's a really cool technology, but that's also in a distribution of TomEE. So we have basically three distributions of TomEE. So we've got the web profile version. That includes all the web profile technologies. In addition, we've added Java Mail. It's a small little library. It's very useful to send email. So we added that to our web profile version. We just recently came out with a new distribution which contains all the web profile stuff plus JAX-RS. And we did that simply because a lot of people didn't want to also have JMS and full-on web services in there. They just wanted basically what is going to be the web profile in Java E7. So we came up with another distribution of that. Then Apache TomEE Plus contains the rest of the things that I mentioned. So web services and JMS, Connect architecture. The first two are certified, and the last one is not. And what that means is that if you have all of these servers pass the same tests, but if you have, say, 5 things in your certified server and you add a 6th thing, and that 6th thing doesn't pass the TCK test, then the whole server can't be considered certified, even though you've not lowered the certification mark. It's unclear at this moment, with talks with Oracle, if you can actually have a certified server that contains things like full EJB but not Corba support. So in Java E7, we'll probably have a full profile certified server, but in Java E6, we just sort of have to have this TomEE Plus uncertified, but still containing all the relevant things that we think are very important. So TomEE is about a year old right now. So happy birthday to TomEE. We released the very first version at Java 1 last year. That was our hello to the world. That was our first certified version. That was beta 1. So we cranked on performance. We cranked on all of the getting the corners, the sharp edges rounded off, polishing it. We finally got it to where we thought it was acceptable in April of this year. And we got so much feedback from that release that it just took us really a long time to close the lid on the next version. I'll show you our stats. They just kind of went crazy. And so finally we got a release out again here in October. We're getting ready to do another one right now. And that had so much in it that we really couldn't just call it like 0.01 or 0.1. There was a whole new distribution that was certified. We had a ton of improvements and fixes. If you look at the change list, it's like several pages long. So we just decided to call a spade and let people know that there were going to be a lot of changes in that release and to version it accordingly. So we took a page out of like Tomcat when they went from 3.0 to 3.05, or I can't remember, it was 5.0 to 5.5, that's what it was. Anyway, so some of the things that people have said about TomEE on our mailing list, here's just some examples. Now, I cut out the server names because I think it's just very bad taste to be trashing other people who aren't here to defend themselves. And the point is not to say that another server is bad. It's to say that TomEE is worth looking at. I don't recommend you take other people's advice without questioning it yourself. The point of this slide is to say, yes, TomEE is worth your time to look at. You should evaluate it for yourself and see if it meets your needs. And incidentally, I like this last one. It says, the rest of them are not quite as pragmatic. This one is, if you're concerned about performance and footprint, but you're okay with solving some problems yourself, TomEE is the perfect server for you. And that's just we're a young project. So here is our website traffic for the last 2 years. That's big bump there is the Java 1 announcement. And then it's just kind of gone crazy since then. Here's our mailing list traffic. It's also just completely spiked up. This is all the mailing lists. That's just the user list. And there's our commits, also just completely spiked up. And here's the rub. Here's the difficult part. This is the number of committers. As you can see, we're still kind of hovering around the same number. Which brings me to this slide. How can you help? If you want, we really like documentation. But actually, I would say more important than documentation are these second two here, blogs and articles. If we write some feedback about TomEE and say, TomEE works great for this or that, it goes about this far. If somebody who isn't a developer on a project says the same thing or similar, it goes much further. So to help TomEE out, blog. Now, when I say blog, I'm not saying you have to print only good things. Print what your experience was. And we'll read your blog. We'll fix any issues that were mentioned. We'll make improvements. We'll respond to your blog post. But blog. We don't care what you say. Go ahead and blog. And then articles. Write some how-tos. Get them published. These two are documentation and they're advocacy, so they're much better than just simply writing documentation. And of course, we have a Facebook page and a Google Plus page and things like that, so you're welcome to follow us on Twitter. There's our hashtag right there. Okay, so I'll do a demo, but before I do a demo, I didn't ask, who has tried out TomEE before? Okay, good, so this will be a really effective demo. All right, so I'm going to show how to use TomEE in Eclipse using the Tomcat web adapter. All right, so I'm just going to make a directory. Can you all read this? Okay, good. All right, and I'm going to extract Eclipse right here, just so we can see that I haven't done any steps in advance and hidden all the hard stuff. So this is the Java EE version of Eclipse that has the WPT tools already in it. All right, I'll extract TomEE. And this is the largest version of TomEE, just so you can see it at its heaviest. And before we get started, I'll just launch TomEE. So as you can see, we're using the same Tomcat startup. It even still says Catalina out. We don't really change a whole lot of Tomcat, or really any. We just add to it. So I'll just browse to So Same Tomcat splash screen that we're used to. The Tomcat admin stuff is still there. We add this little Tomcat GUI thing, and there's not a lot there at this moment. We're currently working on it. You need a password just like you need a password for the Tomcat admin console. I don't have one set up, so I'm just going to navigate away. Okay, I'll shut that down. Okay. All right, now I'll boot up Eclipse. All right, and then the first thing we're going to do when we launch this off is make a new dynamic web project. In Java EE6, you can put pretty much everything in the WAR file. You can put EJBs in there, CDI beans, persistence, basically web services, EJB or not. The days of EAR files are pretty much gone. There's really not a big reason to use an EAR file these days. If you have two WARs and you want to put them in the same class loader, you still don't really even need an EAR file for that. You can just use the Tomcat common class loader for your shared libraries, and then you have the ability to deploy your WAR files independently. So you can get sharing that way, which is essentially what an EAR is. So you don't really need an EAR for much these days. I would recommend just going straight on WAR for just about everything. All right, so we'll say new dynamic web project. Oh, there we go, just call it WJAX. And then we'll add a new runtime. We'll say Tomcat 7. Click Next. And we'll go ahead and add just a little tag on here so we know that this is the Java EE version of Tomcat. We'll browse to the demo directory, click on the Apache TomEE Plus installation, click Open, and then we just say Finish, and Finish. Okay, so now we have a basic little project here. And let's go ahead and create a servlet. All right, and we'll use org wjax for fun. And we'll localize it. That's as much German as I can speak, by the way, so I hope you enjoy it. Okay, and then we'll just say finish. All right, now Eclipse generates a bunch of boilerplate code, which we don't need. Although, however, if you do get paid by the line of code, it's a really good deal. Okay, so now we can see what we're doing a little bit better. All right, so we'll say response, set content type. All right, and then writer, oops. Okay. All right, and then to run this, we simply right-click on it, scroll down to Run As, select Run on Server, and pops up in this dialog box. You can just say always use this server when running. I don't know why it bothers to show it. We just set it up. Okay, and that will boot TomEE. And then open that web page. There it is. So hello servlet. So that's something you can do in Tomcat right now. So we haven't really showed much, but we've just shown that it's basically the same speed and the same heaviness as Tomcat is. So it's not a whole lot. Let's go ahead and add more to this. So we're going to add a bean. We're going to call it hello bean. And I'll say finish. OK. All right, and then we're going to annotate this as an EJB. Singleton. We'll give it a method. I guess maybe, is this right? Welt? Velt? Is that right? Okay, good, good. So I guess I did have one more up my sleeve. Okay. And then we'll go to our servlet here, and we'll get this injected. First, we just make a private field. Oh, that was some boilerplate I didn't expect. Hello bean. And then we just annotate that private field with JavaX EJB, and that will get injected. So again, this is a plain servlet getting some injection from TomEE. Okay. So I save this, and it should cause the server to magically notice. And whatever timeout the Tomcat has, there it goes. And there it was reloaded. OK, now we refresh the page, and there it is. Hello Velt. So we have a servlet now getting communication from an EJB, and we haven't gone to change and hunt down any libraries or do any Googling or follow a page-long tutorial. That doesn't actually work. It's all right there in the box. So there's more that you can do from what's in the box. So if we want, we can turn this thing into a web service. So JW, there we go. So we annotate it with web service. Now this bean was using what was called the local bean view of EJB. When we add another view, that one goes away, so we have to add it explicitly. That's a Java EE rule. It's unintuitive in my opinion. I don't like settings that go away when you add other things. I don't really care for that style, but that's the rule. Okay, so I'll save that, and I don't know. I'll just modify this servlet. There we go. And it should just go ahead and redeploy this. So redeployed that, and we print all the web service addresses in the log files, so you don't have to go Googling around for what the URL might be. So here we have right there web service, and then the WSDL address. So I'll copy that. We'll go over to a browser, paste it in. There it is. So now here's our WSDL for our web service. So we didn't really have to do anything. There's hello bean. There's our message type, the input parameters for it. Yeah, so we just added a web service to our application by adding basically one annotation. We didn't have to go, again, hunting down libraries or anything like that. So there's yet more in the box, so let's show some more. If we want, we can expose this also as a REST service. So we'll add one more annotation on the top. So we add path. I don't know what that's complaining about. And yeah, what? Oh, colon. Yeah, silly me. Okay. IDEs are good for you. Okay, so I'll save that and then touch my servlet. Oh, it already redeployed. All right. Okay, so now we have in the log file the location of our REST service. So again, we don't have to hunt for it. So I'll copy that URL. Hello Velt as a web service, as a RESTful service. So one class, we have a transactional local thing, web service, and RESTful service, all with just adding annotations, because all the stuff is right there in the box, and you don't have to go search around for stuff. And it reloads really quickly. You can see how fast it is. I mean, you probably can't find and add these things to Tomcat in the speed that it takes to reload. I mean, if you can do it in like 800 milliseconds or whatever it takes, you know, then you deserve I don't know, like a lot, I guess. I don't know, medals, a cookie. Okay, let's add one more thing so you can see how to add CDI standardly to a web application. So CDI is not enabled by default in Java EE6. You have to turn it on, and to do that you add a beans XML file to your application. So that has to be in the webinf directory. So we'll simply say new file, you call it beans XML. It does not have to have any content. It's just presence there, turn CDI on. And now we'll add yet another bean. Hello Pojo. We'll say finish. Okay. So we add that one method. We're adding no annotations. So we haven't like said this is a component, this is a servlet, this is an EJB. It's just a plain old Java object. And then we go into our servlet. We can get that being injected by again making another private field. And this time we annotate it with JavaX inject, inject. And that's the sort of Spring CDI annotation for doing a dependency injection. And then we'll go ahead and copy our statement here. And we'll say Pojo get message. We'll save that. And eventually it should notice that the application has changed and reload it. There it does. And we'll go back to our web page. And now we can see Hello Pojo. So basically it took, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes to do that demo. We did servlets, we did EJB, we did web services, RESTful services, and CDI. It's all right there in the box. So if you're using Tomcat and you're trying to cram all this stuff into Tomcat, at a certain point, being able to do it yourself is like saying you're proud because you can sew your own stitches. Yes, you could do it, but maybe someone else can do it better. Maybe you could spend your time, really, as I like to think about it, spend your time writing your application, not writing your app server. You should be able to, from the beginning, just get started and go, and not have to spend all this time integrating that stuff in yourself. Okay, let's go back to our presentation. Okay, come on, Keynote. There we are. Okay, so since that can look like a lot of magic, here is exactly what we do to build TomEE. So first of all, if you're familiar with any US commercials, which probably you aren't, there's a fast food chain and their slogan is "We do it like you do it," which I find that hard to believe, but that's their slogan. So that's what I'm mentioning too, and then you can see what we mean by that. So here are the files that we add to Tomcat. So when we unzip Tomcat, this is what gets thrown in. All right, so on the top, there's 2 config files. They're optional. The TomEE XML file is there so you can declare JMS brokers, configure EJB containers, and the things that Tomcat doesn't allow you to do. So that there is your extra configuration file for the other stuff. The system properties file is something we threw in for convenience. A lot of times you have all these -d flags that you use to start up your server. If you wanted to throw them into this file called system.properties, guess what? Reread those in and add them to the system.properties so they become part of the environment. You don't need to use these flags. Then we've added some Windows service files to make it easier to launch TomEE off as a Windows service. And then we've added some annotations to the endorsed directory. There were some changes between JAX-WB, or excuse me, JAX-B, the XML marshalling API, got added to the JVM in Java 6. But then in Java EE6, they used a different version of JAX-B. So you have to basically cover up what's in the JVM if you want to use web services. And then similarly, the @resource annotation was added to the JVM in Java 6. But then in Java EE6, we went and updated it and added a lookup field parameter to that annotation. So then again, you've got to kind of poke out the JVM version and add the updated version to be certified. And then here are the libraries we had, basically all the ones that are listed on the bullet. And that's Geronimo's Java Mail and Transaction Manager. We used MyFace's OpenEJB, OpenJPA, OpenWebBeans. We use Quartz for EJB at schedule annotation, which if you're not familiar with that, it's really awesome. And then there's some support libraries there. Okay, we modify the server XML file. We add this listener. So between the 2 steps, adding the right libraries to the lib directory and adding the server listener, those are the major steps. You can't skip one of these. The server listener basically boots up all the things that we need to complete the Tomcat lifecycle. So Tomcat fires off a bunch of events. I'm going to start a web application. I'm starting a web application. I have started a web application. It's really verbose. It gives us enough hooks that we can do all the things like scan the web app for web services, scan the web app for EJB, scan the web app for CDI beans. So if you don't have that listener in there because maybe you copied your server XML file from a different install and then things don't work, make sure you have that listener in there. Other than that, things should work fine. In fact, you can take an existing Tomcat, just copy those libraries into the lib directory, add that server XML, and things should work. When I say existing, though, it's got to be version 7 in Tomcat. All right, we do add one extra change, and that's there's a Java agent there to support OpenJPA, which uses runtime enhancement. There's basically 2 ways that you can implement JPA, and that's one by subclassing the entity beans, and then that's what Hibernate does. And the other approach is to bytecode modify the entity beans, and that's what Eclipse Link and OpenJPA do. So that's there to support their runtime modification of the entity beans, the JPA entity beans. So if you don't use OpenJPA or Eclipse Link, if you just use Hibernate, you really don't need that part. It doesn't make anything slow or anything like that. It's just simply don't need it. We did remove 3 things. We moved the annotations API jar, which does not have the extra lookup field that I mentioned. Then we removed the EL API jar. It was in the Java EE API jar that we put in TomEE, that we put in Tomcat, and that API jar contains the CDI, EJB, web services, and all those other specification libraries. And then we just yanked the web apps, and that was, or the example web apps. We could have left it in. It was 50-50 either way. We just decided to yank it to keep the footprint down. Okay, so that's all the things we do to modify Tomcat. So it's not a lot. In terms of certification, so I've mentioned certification a few times. So this is what it means to be certified. If you want to create an app server, a Java EE app server, you need to first get a TCK from Oracle. That's a huge feat right there. Eclipse link. The Eclipse Foundation has been trying to get one. They still don't have one. Apache got one years ago. At the same time they handed one out to JBoss, and the same time they handed one out to Jonas. And so we've had this TCK. So it's very, very large. I can't say how large it is because of NDA requirements, but it takes more than a week to run. So it's huge. Compliance is not a small thing, it's a very, very big thing. So because this takes such a long time to run, we're an open source project, we're small, we need to be a little more light on our feet than a 1 week turnaround between builds. So what we did was we put this all up into Amazon EC2, and then we take this this test suite full of tens of thousands of tests, and we break it up into like 750 chunks of tests. We throw that onto an active MQQ. We launch off like say 100 T1 micro instances. They each start pulling work off the queue. They do it, they aggregate the results back, and we can get results basically in 2 hours. So that was a very big reason why we were able to go so quickly with TomEE. We basically started certifying it in February of 2011, and we were finished by October of 2011. It would be unfair to say that that was because we're completely awesome, although I think we are. That was really because of the tools that we had, that we built to make it go faster for us, so we could be more iterative in our development of TomEE. And then also because the components that we put into TomEE are very mature. They're used in a lot of other servers. OpenJPAs, they're in WebSphere. MyFaces is also used in Geronimo. It's OpenWebBeans also used in WebSphere. It's pretty compatible. So in addition to the testing that we do, we add a bunch of additional tests, or Arquillian tests. How many of you have heard of Arquillian? Okay, I'm going to hopefully demo it if we've got some time here later on. It's pretty amazing. So anytime people have bug reports and they say my war doesn't work, we add a test case that replicates what they had exactly, so that when we fix it, we make sure it doesn't regress. So we have a growing number of Arquillian tests. So all said and done, we've got basically a couple thousand hours of tests that go into a TomEE binary. And the neat thing is that we certify on EC2, so I guess technically we're cloud certified for whatever that's worth. And also pretty interesting is that when we run the TCK on these instances, the T1 micro instances have only 613 megabytes of memory on them. We actually don't increase the Java VM memory at all, so we're running TomEE only with the default 64 that you boot with. So we actually passing the TCK with the default memory settings, the default 64, which I don't think anybody else has done. We've been saying it for a year now, and no one else has bothered to say me too, so I guess that's the case. The cool thing about that is, you have 613 megabytes of memory on the machine, minus 64, you get the entire rest of that for your application, which is pretty great. That's a lot left over to actually make, get some useful things done on those T1 micro instances, because the next step up, the M1, is 4 times the cost. So it's very significant. So the results are, we've got basically a 27 megabyte web profile binary. The full profile, the TomEE Plus distribution is 44 megabytes. Runs in the 64 memory. It works with all the Tomcat tools. Recently, JRebel announced support for TomEE. IntelliJ announced support for TomEE. Like when IntelliJ already supported TomEE, we just filed a bug report, a bug tracker saying, please add explicit support for TomEE. They did it, and then they left it in the Tomcat tools, and we're like, can you add it? So it says TomEE, so people know. So basically, adding that was they just copied the Tomcat one over and labeled it TomEE, and they had it done. Which is really kind of what, we're working with some other vendors as well to get them to add TomEE support. They already have Tomcat support. Really, it's the process of getting them to understand that they already have TomEE support and labeling it so people know that they're testing it and things like that. Okay, so doing it yourself. There's a few problems with doing it yourself. One of them is that it takes a really long time. It takes a while to integrate all this stuff together. It's not easy. Also, I think that when you're learning a new technology and you're the one responsible for integrating it, that's sort of a really hard role to fill. You're supposed to know how the technology works enough while you're learning it to integrate it. That's sort of really difficult. If you run into a problem, you always are asking yourself, is this problem there because I integrated it improperly? Is this problem there because there's a bug in the thing that I'm actually integrating? Or is this problem there because I don't understand the technology is not supposed to do what I expect it to do? You have all these questions. It's so difficult to have to integrate all the stuff together while you're learning it. Okay, why do that? And then the other thing is that it's actually not very performant. It's not as performant as it could be. So if you were to take Tomcat and you were to add, say, my faces in there, then and you boot that up, and you got, you know, 20 megabyte WAR file, Tomcat's going to scan the entire WAR file for servlets, filters, and listeners. Then my faces is to scan the whole web app for JSF managed beans. Now you add OpenJP in there. OpenJP is going to scan again the entire web app, and you add OpenWebBeans in there, again the whole web app. Now you start to use web services, and then the web service implementation scans the whole web app for web services, no cooperation. So not only do you have the number of scans go up, but the amount of libraries in the web app is increasing. So now you have my faces scanning OpenJPA and OpenJPA scanning my faces and vice versa, and it just takes a long time. It's not as fast as it could be. And then you have all the server libraries in your web app, and you end up with a lot more memory requirements. Because now I'm certain that every time you come up with a new web app, you load it with a whole bunch of libraries you know you're going to need, and then you have all these really big WAR files, and you end up using a lot of memory. Thirdly, incomplete parts. When you drop OpenJPA into Tomcat, for example, OpenJPA does not implement 100% of the JPA specification. Surprise. This is the case for a lot of technologies. It doesn't implement container-managed entity managers, which is basically tracking entity managers with a transaction manager. It doesn't implement that. You can only do local transactions with OpenJPA. You need more functionality to track your entity manager with an actual transaction manager. That's not implemented by OpenJPA. Similarly, OpenWebBeans, they only implement about 60% of the CDI specification because CDI is very heavily an integration technology. It's about integrating basic beans with JSF and integrating that with EJB and integrating that with servlets. So they only do portions of that, and where they don't like the functionality because they don't use it, they don't implement it. So we have to implement all this extra stuff when we build TomEE. And similarly, even Tomcat has some gaps in there. Like in Java EE6, we added what JBoss has had for years, which is basically global JNDI. So we standardized this concept of global JNDI. So if you have a web app here and a web app there, and they want to share information through JNDI, there's a new namespace called Java Global, and that's not implemented by Tomcat. There's simply we don't like JNDI, icky. They didn't implement it. Similarly, there's a new annotation in E6 that allows you to define a data source in your web application standardly, so you don't have to use server config files. And it's an @data source definition annotation. You specify your driver or your data source implementation. The server scans that and then configures it. They didn't implement that either. So when you put all these things together, you still don't exactly have a cohesive, complete environment. In fact, when we created TomEE, we first threw all the stuff into Tomcat. We only got about 40% of the way through the web profile TCK because there's all these little things that just were not there. And so, you know, when you have these things that you've cobbled together yourself, it may seem like that app is perhaps a little bit portable, but you're using so much less of what the actual APIs are supposed to give you, and it's not exactly quite the portable thing because you've filled in all these gaps in your own way, and they may actually conflict with what a certified standard server is supposed to do. All right, there we go. So, and then another thing that I think is really important is that when you find a bug in your stack that you've created yourself, who do you share that bug fix with? I mean, like, you have your own integration code. It's like, if only there was a place where we could all just share these bug fixes, like a project that was focused on integrating things onto Tomcat. Anyway, and then the same thing with tests, you know. How many tests do you write for your integrations? So when you upgrade a library and it breaks a bunch of things, I mean, do you have tests for that? I mean, that's a big question. A lot of people don't actually have any tests for their Java EE applications, let alone tests for the integrations that they've created for their server. So, you know, basically, you get the equivalent thing to what you would build yourself, but it's got lots and lots of testing into it. Arquillian. So I mentioned it earlier. Arquillian is a really great testing API. It's been long needed in Java EE, and just so I can ask, how many of you have tests for your applications? Yeah, some hands don't go up. How many of you have unit tests for those web applications? Okay, so about the same number of hands. That's good. So this is a little fun thing. All your bugs are belong to us. That's a reference to an old video game that had a badly translated slogan, which was all your base are belong to us. Anyway, so this is all your bugs are belong to us. So we have basically 4 Arquillian adapters to go with each of the flavors of TomEE that we offer. So there's a remote adapter, which is basically if you want to test your application on TomEE that's running separately somewhere on your network or on another machine or even on the same machine just as a separate process. Then you have an embedded adapter. It boots TomEE up inside the VM. It's much quicker. And that's what I typically recommend people just develop with the embedded adapter, and then of course make sure you run it on the remote adapter once you're doing your QA and things like that. And then we have an adapter for what we call the Tomcat plus drop-in TomEE WAR file. We do offer TomEE as a WAR file that you can drop into a Tomcat 7 installation. And that's for people who have a Tomcat installation already and they don't want to move to TomEE and are simply not confident enough, and they drop in the WAR file and they get the same functionality. And then we have one for, actually, TomEE comes from a project, OpenEJB, which OpenEJB implements basically the same thing TomEE does, minus servlets JSP. And it predates a lot of the stuff that we're doing with TomEE. And it's very, very quick. All right, so here, let me just show that quickly. We've got about 10 minutes. All right. So this is actually right there in the TomEE build. So I'm going to pick a chunk of tests here. We have a lot of tests here. So the idea with CDI, with Arquillian, is that it has an API for booting the server, an API for setting up the server, deploying the web app, running the tests, undeploying the web app, shutting down the server, and so it sounds kind of slow, but it actually works out really great because you can run a chunk of tests and only do the steps that are required once. So here I'm going to run all these CDI, these little small chunk of CDI tests that we have, and that run in basically 6 seconds. So that ran these sets of tests, booted the server, ran the test, shut the server down, done, 6 seconds. Let's take a little bit closer look at some of these tests. So here we have the basic chemistry of an Arquillian test is 1, you say runs with Arquillian. So this is basically a JUnit test with the runs with annotation. Let's look at the imports just so we can see. There's the JUnit portion of it. Then you just have regular old @test methods. And here's the important part, is you say, here's the web app that I want. And what you can do is basically build the web app in code containing just as much as you want. So you can mail the web app to be a portion or a fraction of what the web app actually needs. As well, if you have two implementations of something, one for just mocking, you could not include the actual implementation and then include the mock implementation, because you're able to build up the entire WAR file in code. So you can actually do mocking, you can test very focused small amounts of work, and so you return this basically web archive, and then that gets deployed into TomEE. And yeah, so it's really, and then this is a neat little part here. What happens with this is that Arquillian will inject the location of your web app. So you don't need to worry about what ports or host address your tests are going to use. So all that complexity is now out of the test. So you just get a URL, and that will basically be the base URL of your web app. So you don't need to worry about the address and all that kind of stuff. And as well, in the TomEE web adapter, if you just simply say the port is -1, we'll pick a random port. We'll use that, so there's no port conflicts. And then because you don't have to worry about the port in the test, basically you can run all these things in parallel on a CI system and not have any conflicts. So it's pretty great. The great thing about using an embedded adapter is that you can step through and debug your actual application. You don't have to use remote debugging. You don't have to do any kind of complicated things like build up a WAR file, push it onto a server, start it up with the debug port, and then of course you put that in the Java ops, so now you can't shut the server down with the same shell because it's got the debug stuff in the Java ops. You need to, it's a bit complicated. So I've put a couple breakpoints. Now, here we go. We're using actually a CDI functionality that's going to be part of Java EE 7, and that's the ability to have constructor injection in a servlet. So finally, you can actually have final fields in your servlet. So we have our servlet. It's got a CDI at inject on it. It wants a car. It gets a car, so we put a breakpoint there, and we put a breakpoint in the do-get. So if you want to run this, just right-click on it, say debug. Now this works in Eclipse too. Just because I use IntelliJ doesn't mean you have to. There we go. So that's the constructor breakpoint was reached. So there's our car. We have good taste in cars, I guess. And then we hit run, and now we come to our do-get. So we can test, develop, and debug all of our Java EE applications as if they're plain JUnit applications. And now here comes the really awesome part, is that this exact same test will work on a remote server. Not just will work on a remote server, there are Arquillian adapters for JBoss, Glassfish, you name it. So this test actually isn't even TomEE specific. This test you can rerun as many times as you want on as many servers as you want. So this is like the holy grail of Java EE testing. If you're not using Arquillian, you must. There's no good reason not to. That's just too much benefit to reject. You've got to look at it. So we have great adapters for Arquillian. Maybe got time to show one little thing, and this is kind of a neat little feature for TomEE, and that's we've got a nice little Maven plugin. How many of you use Maven? Good chunk of the room, yeah. So as a little joke on Maven, Maven does basically everything these days. I don't know how many of you have used Emacs, but there was a joke that, it's a really good email client, but I only wish it had a text editor. Sort of like people talk about the iPhone, like it's a great computer only if it had a phone application. It's the same thing. Anyway, Maven does like everything these days, and building your code is only a fraction of it. So that's my little joke on Maven. So we have a plugin, a Maven plugin, which will provision a server for you. So you specify all of your dependencies in a POM file. You specify this plugin, and then you get to pick the ports that you want. You can add debug ports if you want to do some remote debugging. And then the really cool thing is you can have libraries copied into the lib directory. So your SQL drivers, if you want to use an embedded database, you can throw that in the lib directory. And then you say, here are the web apps that I want, and I want this one to be called root, so it goes at the slash. And this one I'm going to add as well. So all of the scripting that you would normally do to boot up a server, add the libraries in there, add the web apps, maybe rename them because you want one of them to be called root, all of that's done with the plugin. And so it really does eliminate quite a lot of, really most of the work. So you can actually provision this server, and then you can use maven space tomee:run, maven space tomee:stop, start. There's a bunch of commands there. So the cool thing is now you have just a little maven POM file that actually, if you just deploy your web apps to a repo in your local environment, so you have a nexus inside your company, you put your web apps in there, you put your libraries in there, and then you can just use a little POM file to pull it down, assemble it, and boot the server. So a few chunks of text. You can have as many of these POM files as you want for as many different profiles of applications. So if you have 400 apps, you just need like 400 little POM files, and that's all you need to maintain. And Maven does some pretty cool things, like allowing you to use variable substitution, so you can have any part of these strings be variables. So project base dir is a variable. That's a Maven variable. You can add variables too. You just say properties and put them up in the top. So that's kind of 95% of what you would need from a little scripting type of console. So it's a really, really cool thing. We're probably out of time now, so questions? Any questions about Tomee? No? Okay. You sure? All right, well, thank you very much. I really hope you enjoyed Tomee, and